My marriage had the stability of a Jenga tower in an earthquake. The signs were everywhere, but I'd been too busy fixing other people's cars to notice my own life falling apart. My name is Nathan Callahan, and I run a small auto repair shop in the grittier part of Boston. 37 years old, hands permanently stained with motor oil, and apparently blind to the obvious. My wife Melissa had been acting strange for months, but I chalked it up to work stress. She's a PR manager at some fancy marketing firm downtown, always dealing with crisis management for rich clients who can't keep their mouths shut. "Nate, I'm working late again tonight," she announced that Tuesday morning, not even looking up from her phone as she sipped her overpriced coffee. Her manicured nails tapped against the ceramic mug with an irritating rhythm. "Third time this week?" I said, wiping grease from my hands with an old rag. "Must be some project." She finally glanced up, her perfectly applied makeup already camera-ready at 7 in the morning. "It's complicated. You wouldn't understand." That phrase had become her favorite lately. I wouldn't understand her job, her friends, her need for expensive yoga classes, or her sudden obsession with posting inspirational quotes on social media. Apparently, I was too simple-minded to grasp the complexities of her elevated existence. "Try me," I said, genuinely curious about what kept her at the office until midnight. "It's about brand management and reputation recovery. Very technical stuff." She grabbed her designer purse and headed for the door. "Don't wait up." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone in our cramped apartment with the lingering scent of her perfume and the growing certainty that something was seriously wrong. At the shop, my best friend Tommy stopped by during his lunch break from the bar where he worked. Tommy's one of those guys who sees everything and says exactly what he thinks, whether you want to hear it or not. "She's cheating on you," he said without preamble, cracking open a beer despite it being barely noon. "Good afternoon to you too," I replied, sliding under a Honda Civic to check the transmission fluid. "I'm serious, Nate. Crystal was in the bar last night, running her mouth as usual. She kept talking about how Melissa's finally getting what she deserves, and how some guy named Trevor is so much more sophisticated than regular working guys." I rolled out from under the car, wiping my hands on my coveralls. Crystal was Melissa's closest friend, a social media influencer who made a living posting photos of her breakfast and giving relationship advice to teenagers. If she was talking, it meant Melissa had been confiding in her. "Trevor?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Yeah, apparently he's her boss or something. Drives a fancy BMW, takes her to expensive restaurants. Crystal was practically drooling talking about him." My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm. "That doesn't mean anything. Maybe they're just working together." Tommy gave me the look he reserved for people who insisted they could drive home after 8 beers. "When's the last time you took Melissa to an expensive restaurant?" He had a point. My idea of a nice dinner was the Italian place down the street where they knew our names and didn't judge me for showing up with motor oil under my fingernails. That evening, I decided to surprise Melissa by picking her up from work. Her office building was one of those glass towers downtown that made you feel underdressed just looking at it. I parked across the street and waited. At 8:30, she emerged from the building, but she wasn't alone. A tall guy in an expensive suit walked beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back in a way that was definitely not professional. He was everything I wasn't. Polished, confident, driving a car that cost more than I made in 2 years. They stopped beside his BMW, and I watched as he leaned in close to whisper something in her ear. She laughed, throwing her head back in that genuine way she used to laugh with me. When he kissed her cheek, she didn't pull away. I sat in my battered pickup truck, watching my wife with another man, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like the calm that comes right before a storm hits. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Working super late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." I stared at the message, then looked up to see her getting into Trevor's BMW. They drove past me without a glance, probably heading to one of those trendy restaurants where they charge $30 for a piece of fish. Instead of going home, I drove to Tommy's bar. The place was mostly empty, except for a few regulars nursing their drinks and watching a baseball game on the ancient television above the bar. "You look like someone ran over your dog," Tommy said, sliding a beer across the scarred wooden bar. "Saw her with him," I said simply. Tommy nodded like he'd been expecting this. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." But that wasn't entirely true. Ideas were already forming in my mind, plans taking shape like blueprints for a complicated repair job. I'd always been good with my hands, good at fixing things that were broken. The question was whether my marriage was worth fixing or if it was time to total it out. The next few days passed in a strange haze of normalcy. Melissa continued her late-night work sessions while I quietly gathered evidence. Not in any creepy stalker way, but just paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. Her phone, for instance, which she now guarded like state secrets. The way she'd jump when it buzzed, checking messages with a little smile that never appeared when she was texting me. The new clothes that were too fancy for client meetings but perfect for impressing someone special. On Thursday morning, I was fixing coffee when her phone rang. She was in the shower, so I glanced at the screen out of habit. Trevor Gold. The name hit me like a wrench to the gut. "Can you get that?" she called from the bathroom. "If it's work, tell them I'll call back." "It's Trevor," I called back, proud of how steady my voice sounded. There was a pause, then the sound of the shower turning off. "Oh, just let it go to voicemail. It's probably nothing important." "Nothing important?" "Right." That afternoon, Crystal stopped by the shop. She'd never shown any interest in cars before, so I knew she was fishing for information. "How are things with you and Melissa?" she asked, perching on a stool and trying to look casual. "Fine," I said, not looking up from the engine I was working on. "Why?" "Oh, no reason. She just seems stressed lately. All those late nights at work, you know?" I could feel her watching me, waiting for a reaction. Crystal lived for drama, and she was clearly hoping to stir some up. "Work's been busy for her," I agreed. "Lots of important projects." "Yeah, she's been working really closely with Trevor on some big campaign. He's such a nice guy, really successful. I met him at that company party last month." I'd never been invited to any company parties. According to Melissa, they were boring work events where spouses would just be in the way. "Sounds great," I said, my voice flat. Crystal looked disappointed by my lack of reaction. She'd probably been hoping I'd lose my temper and give her something juicy to report back to Melissa. That evening, I was channel surfing when Melissa's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She was in the kitchen making tea, humming some song I didn't recognize. The phone was facing up, and I could see the message preview. "Trevor, can't wait to see you tonight. That little place we talked about." Melissa, "Perfect. He's watching TV? Totally clueless as usual?" I stared at the screen until it went dark, those words burning into my memory. Totally clueless. That's what she thought of me, just some simple mechanic who was too stupid to notice his wife was having an affair. "Who was that?" I asked when she came back into the room. "Work stuff," she said, snatching up the phone. "I need to go in for a few hours. Crisis management." On a Friday night? She was already heading for the bedroom to change clothes. You know how it is. When clients panic, we have to respond immediately. I knew how it was, all right, just not the way she thought I did. After she left, I sat alone in our apartment and tried to figure out what I was feeling. Hurt, obviously. Betrayed, definitely. But underneath those emotions was something else. A cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. I'd never been the type to make scenes or throw tantrums. When something broke, I fixed it methodically, step by step. When something couldn't be fixed, I replaced it. The question was which category my marriage fell into. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my mother. "How's married life treating you?" she asked, the way she did every time we talked. "It's complicated, Mom." "Complicated how?" "You two seemed happy at Christmas." Christmas was 6 months ago, back when Melissa still pretended to enjoy my company. Back when she'd laugh at my jokes instead of rolling her eyes. Back when she'd introduce me to her coworkers instead of finding excuses to leave me at home. "Things change," I said. Mom was quiet for a moment. She'd always been good at reading between the lines. "You want to talk about it?" "Not yet, but maybe soon." "You know where to find me when you're ready." After we hung up, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Melissa yet, wasn't going to make accusations or demands. Instead, I was going to do what I did best. Gather information, make a plan, and execute it properly. If Melissa wanted to play games, I'd play along, but I'd be playing by my rules, not hers. Saturday morning brought an unexpected development. Melissa announced she was going to a work retreat for the weekend, some team-building exercise at a resort in the mountains. "It's mandatory," she said, packing her nicest clothes into an expensive suitcase I'd never seen before. "All the senior staff have to attend." "Sounds fun," I said, not bothering to hide my skepticism. "It's not supposed to be fun, Nate. It's professional development." "Right. Professional development at a romantic mountain resort with her boyfriend." I wondered if Trevor was going to the same retreat, but I didn't ask. I was learning the value of keeping my mouth shut and my eyes open. After she left, I decided to do some professional development of my own. I drove to Tommy's bar and found him setting up for the lunch crowd. "She's gone for the weekend," I told him. "Let me guess, work retreat?" "How do you know?" "Because Crystal was in here last night, talking about how Melissa was going away with some guy from her office. She seemed to think it was romantic." I helped Tommy stack chairs, working off nervous energy. "What else did she say?" "Plenty. Apparently this Trevor guy is everything you're not. Rich, sophisticated, drives a fancy car." Crystal kept going on about how Melissa deserves someone who can appreciate her. Appreciate her how? Expensive dinners, weekend getaways, designer clothes, all that stuff that matters to shallow people. I thought about our early days together, when Melissa seemed happy with pizza dates and walks in the park, when she'd wear my old t-shirts and claim they were more comfortable than anything she owned. Either I'd never really known her, or success had changed her into someone I didn't recognize. "What are you going to do?" Tommy asked. "I'm going to find out exactly what I'm dealing with." That afternoon, I drove to Melissa's office building. The parking garage was mostly empty, but I spotted Trevor's BMW in a reserved space marked T Gold, Senior Partner. No wonder he could afford expensive restaurants and mountain retreats. The security guard at the front desk was reading a newspaper and barely looked up when I walked in. "I'm here to see my wife," I said. "Melissa Callahan in PR?" "Sorry, most of the staff is at the company retreat this weekend." "Right, the retreat. Do you know when they'll be back?" "Sunday evening, I think. Big team building thing up at Mountain View Resort." I thanked him and left, my suspicions confirmed. They were together, probably sharing a room and laughing about how easy it was to fool the simple mechanic back home. But I wasn't as simple as they thought. Sunday evening, Melissa came home glowing with what she claimed was fresh mountain air and professional accomplishment. "How was the retreat?" I asked, genuinely curious about what story she'd tell. "Exhausting, but productive. Lots of team exercises and strategic planning sessions." She was unpacking her suitcase, and I noticed she'd brought home more clothes than she'd taken. "Trevor gave an amazing presentation on crisis management." "Trevor was there?" "Of course he was there. He's senior partner." She paused, probably realizing she'd revealed more than intended. "All the department heads attended." I nodded like this made perfect sense. "Learn anything useful?" "Lots of things. Mostly about how to handle situations when they get complicated." The irony was almost funny. She was talking about crisis management while creating the biggest crisis of our marriage. That night, while she slept beside me, I lay awake planning my next move. I could confront her directly, but that would just lead to denials and excuses. I could hire a private investigator, but that seemed like overkill for something I already knew was true. Or I could handle this myself, the way I handled everything else, methodically, thoroughly, and with the kind of attention to detail that comes from years of solving problems. By morning, I'd made my decision. If Melissa wanted to play the part of the wronged wife dealing with a clueless husband, I'd give her exactly what she expected. But I'd also be documenting everything, building a case that would leave no room for denial when the time came for truth. The game was on, and I intended to win. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Tuesday afternoon, Melissa called to say she was working late again, but this time she made a mistake. "Trevor and I need to finish the Morrison account presentation," she said. "We'll probably be here until midnight." The Morrison account. I'd heard her mention it before, but something about the timing bothered me. After she hung up, I called the main number for her company and asked to be transferred to the Morrison account team. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said, "but the Morrison presentation was completed last week. The client approved everything on Friday." Interesting. So either Melissa was lying about what she was working on, or she was lying about working at all. I decided to find out which. At 7:30, I drove to Trevor's apartment building. It was one of those modern glass towers where even the parking spaces probably cost more than my monthly rent. I found a spot across the street and settled in to wait. At 8:15, Trevor's BMW pulled into the building's garage. At 8:20, a taxi dropped Melissa off at the front entrance. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something that probably cost more than I made in a week. They weren't working late. They were having dinner at his place, probably laughing about how easy it was to deceive the simple mechanic who actually believed his wife when she said she loved him. I sat in my truck for 2 hours, watching the lights in what I assumed was Trevor's apartment, and felt that cold anger settling deeper into my chest. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger that makes you do stupid things. The patient, calculating kind that makes you do effective things. When I got home, Melissa was already there, wearing pajamas and claiming she'd gotten home an hour ago. "How was work?" I asked. "Productive. We got a lot done on the Morrison account." I nodded and went to bed, but I didn't sleep much. Instead, I lay there planning my next move. The following day, I paid a visit to Melissa's company, not to see her, but to have lunch with Janet, the receptionist I'd spoken to on the phone. She was a friendly woman in her 50s who'd been with the company for years and knew everyone's business. "Oh, you're Melissa's husband," she said when I introduced myself. "I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope." She hesitated just long enough to make me wonder what exactly Melissa had been saying about me around the office. "She talks about how hard you work," Janet said diplomatically. We settled down into a cozy booth, the kind of setting that naturally invites casual conversation. The sandwiches were just a backdrop for what was about to unfold, a conversation that, at first glance, seemed innocent but held far more weight. I had a particular direction I wanted to take the discussion in, so I subtly steered the conversation toward office relationships and workplace dynamics. Janet, being someone who was generally open and willing to chat, didn't hesitate to share whatever tidbits she had. Her voice dropped a little, making the conversation feel like an intimate exchange between confidants, which in this case was exactly what I needed. "Things have been interesting around the office lately," she began, her tone laced with a kind of cautious curiosity. She looked around as if making sure no one else was listening. "There's been talk about Trevor and one of the PR managers getting a little too close. And by close, I mean, well, you can probably guess." I leaned in slightly, intrigued, sensing that something was a little off. "Really?" I responded, trying to mask the shock that was bubbling up inside me. "Yeah," she continued, shaking her head in disbelief. "Office romances aren't exactly unheard of, but most people are smart about it. They keep it low-key. These two, though, they're practically flaunting it. I mean, they've been having lunch together every single day, staying late at the office together, and even traveling for client meetings together. It's a little too much, if you ask me." I raised an eyebrow, processing the information. It wasn't exactly scandalous by office standards, but it definitely raised some eyebrows, especially considering that Trevor, at least from what I knew, had a family. "That doesn't sound very professional," I commented, the words slipping out before I could fully think through the implications. Janet nodded in agreement, her lips curling into a slight frown. "Exactly. It's one thing if they were discreet, but these two are practically an item. Everyone's talking about it." She paused for a moment, as if reflecting on how uncomfortable this situation really was. "Honestly, I'm surprised HR hasn't stepped in yet." I furrowed my brow, genuinely curious about how HR had been handling the situation. "What does HR think about it?" Janet gave a dismissive wave of her hand. "HR? They're probably just sitting back, waiting for someone to file a formal complaint. But here's the thing. Trevor's married. He has a wife and 2 kids in the suburbs, so that complicates things a bit." I froze. Trevor was married. The thought didn't even cross my mind. Sure, I'd heard his name in passing at the office, but I didn't know much about his personal life. This new piece of information added a completely new level of complexity to the situation. The possibility that someone in our office was juggling a marriage and an affair was both shocking and eye-opening. "Wait, what's his wife's name?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I could feel the weight of the question. I had to know more. "Linda, I think," Janet said. "She's a teacher, from what I know. Really nice lady. Everyone says she's sweet, really dedicated to her family. Seems like the perfect suburban mom type." She smiled wistfully, likely imagining the idealized version of Linda she'd heard about. "Honestly, I feel bad for her. She's probably clueless." That evening, I couldn't shake what Janet had told me. My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, and I knew I had to find out more. Social media, as it turned out, was a goldmine. A quick search led me to Linda Gold's public Facebook profile. It was filled with photos of family vacations, school activities, and personal posts about her work as a teacher. From everything I could see, Linda was exactly as Janet described her, warm, family-oriented, and seemingly unaware of the drama brewing just under the surface of her life. There she was, smiling in every picture, looking completely devoted to her husband and children, unaware that Trevor had been carrying on an affair with one of his employees. I spent the next few days in a strange mix of fascination and unease. I kept my observations of Trevor and Melissa quiet, focusing on gathering as much evidence as I could. Every time I saw them together, I made a mental note of the time and place. I started noticing patterns. The late-night work sessions seemed like a regular thing. I even stumbled upon some receipts in Melissa's purse from fancy restaurants, places Trevor and I had never been to, places that screamed date night. The more I saw, the more certain I became that there was something going on between them. By Friday, I felt like I had everything I needed. My hands shook as I printed out all the evidence. Photos of Melissa entering Trevor's office building, screenshots of her social media posts bragging about working late, and a copy of the project timeline showing that the Morrison account had been completed a full week before Melissa had claimed it was still a work in progress. The pieces were falling into place, and I had to act fast. I decided to drive out to Linda Gold's school that evening. It wasn't easy. Part of me felt like I was crossing a line, intruding on something that wasn't my business, but the other part of me couldn't just sit back and let this continue. I had to confront the truth, even if it meant breaking someone's heart. When I arrived at the school parking lot, I sat there for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It wasn't until Linda walked out of the school building that I knew it was time to make my move. She was exactly how I'd imagined her, professional, kind, and completely unaware of the betrayal happening under her nose. She smiled at someone in the parking lot before turning her attention to her car. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. She stopped when she saw me, her expression shifting from friendly to confused but not alarmed. "Mrs. Gold?" I called out, my voice carrying through the stillness of the evening. "I'm Nathan Callahan. I think we need to talk about our spouses." Her eyes widened, but she didn't immediately react with anger or disbelief. Instead, she just looked at me, trying to make sense of the situation. "About our spouses?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "Yes, it's about your husband, Trevor." I could see her face begin to change as the realization hit her. She was starting to piece everything together. The shock, the confusion, it was all there, and I knew this conversation would change everything for her. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult I'd ever had. Linda's face went through a series of emotions as I showed her the evidence. Confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally a quiet anger that matched my own. "I suspected something," she said finally. The late meetings, the business trips, the way he'd get secretive about his phone. But I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. You weren't being paranoid. "What do we do now?" I looked at this woman whose life was about to change as dramatically as mine had, and I felt a kinship with her. We were both victims of the same selfish people who thought they were too clever to get caught. "We make sure they face the consequences of their choices," I said. Linda and I spent the weekend planning our approach. She was smarter than I'd expected, with a teacher's attention to detail and a mother's protective instincts. She also had access to Trevor's financial records, which revealed some interesting information about his expensive lifestyle. "He's been using our joint credit cards for restaurants I've never been to," she told me over coffee on Saturday morning. "Hotels, gifts, even a weekend trip to that mountain resort where Melissa said she went for work." "What are you going to do?" "What any smart woman would do. I'm going to protect myself and my children." Her voice was calm, but I could see the steel underneath. "Trevor thinks he's so clever, but he's about to learn that teachers know how to do research too." Monday morning, I called in sick to work and positioned myself across from Melissa's office building. At 11:30, she and Trevor emerged together, walking close and laughing about something. They got into his BMW and drove to an upscale restaurant downtown. I followed at a distance and parked where I could see them through the restaurant's large windows. They were holding hands across the table, looking like any other couple enjoying a romantic lunch, except they weren't a couple. They were two married people betraying their spouses and apparently enjoying every minute of it. While they ate, I called Linda. "They're at Romano's on 5th Street, I told her. "Looks like they're celebrating something." "Perfect timing," she said. "I just finished cleaning out our joint accounts and filing for legal separation. Trevor's about to have a very interesting afternoon." At 2:00, I watched through the restaurant window as Trevor's phone rang. He answered with his usual confident smile, but his expression changed quickly. He stood up abruptly, said something sharp to Melissa, and headed for the door. Melissa looked confused and hurt, probably wondering why her romantic lunch had been cut short. She had no idea that Linda was at that moment explaining to Trevor exactly what she thought of his extracurricular activities. I followed Melissa back to her office, then drove home to wait. She'd be getting some interesting news soon, and I wanted to be there to see her reaction. At 6:30, she came through the door, looking shaken. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "How was work?" I asked, the same question I'd been asking for weeks. "Fine," she said, but her voice was strained. "Just the usual office drama." "Anything I should know about?" She looked at me sharply, probably wondering if I'd heard something. "No, nothing important. Just some personnel issues." Personnel issues. That was one way to describe it. Over the next few days, I watched the situation unravel. Trevor stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped being available for those late-night work sessions. Melissa became increasingly agitated, checking her phone constantly and making excuses to leave the apartment. On Thursday, she finally cracked. "I need to tell you something," she said, sitting across from me at our kitchen table. "There's been a situation at work." "What kind of situation?" "Trevor and we got close while working together, too close. His wife found out and she's causing problems." I kept my expression neutral, even though I wanted to laugh at her version of events. She was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make herself the victim. "How close?" I asked. "We had an affair," she said, finally admitting what I'd known for weeks. It wasn't supposed to happen, but we connected on a professional level and it just evolved into something more. "How long?" 3 months? She was crying now, but they looked like calculated tears. "I never meant for it to happen, Nate. You have to believe that." I believed she never meant to get caught. That was probably true. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want to work things out. We can go to counseling, take a trip together, whatever it takes. I made a mistake, but our marriage is worth fighting for." I looked at this woman I'd been married to for 5 years, this person I thought I knew, and realized I was looking at a stranger. The Melissa I'd fallen in love with wouldn't have had an affair. She wouldn't have lied to my face for months. She wouldn't have called me clueless behind my back. "No," I said simply. "No what?" "No, we're not going to counseling. No, we're not taking a trip. No, our marriage isn't worth fighting for." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where we'd planned to build a life together. "You made your choice, Melissa. Now I'm making mine." "You're not even going to try?" I turned back to face her, and for the first time in months, I felt completely calm. "I've been trying for 3 months," I said. "I tried when you started working late every night. I tried when you stopped laughing at my jokes. I tried when you started treating me like I was too stupid to notice what was happening right in front of me." I picked up the folder I'd been keeping on the kitchen counter. "I tried right up until I realized you didn't want me to succeed." I handed her the folder. Inside were copies of everything: the photos, the timeline, the evidence I'd gathered while she thought I was being clueless. She opened it and went pale. "You followed me?" "I paid attention. There's a difference. This is stalking. This is documentation, and before you start planning your next story, you should know that Linda has copies of everything too, along with the financial records showing how Trevor was spending their money on you." Melissa stared at the papers, probably realizing for the first time that her secret wasn't secret anymore, that the simple mechanic she'd been deceiving had been several steps ahead of her the entire time. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you pack your things and find somewhere else to live. The lease is in my name, and I want you gone by Sunday." "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem anymore." She tried arguing, tried negotiating, tried crying. But I was done listening to her lies. On Sunday afternoon, she loaded her belongings into a rental truck and drove away, leaving behind nothing but the lingering scent of her perfume and 5 years of memories I no longer wanted to keep. Tommy came over that evening with a case of beer and a pizza from our favorite place. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it while I opened 2 bottles and handed him one. "Free," I said finally. For the first time in months, I feel completely free. We sat on my couch, eating pizza and watching baseball, and I realized that sometimes the best way to fix something broken is to let it stay broken. Some things aren't worth repairing, some things are better off replaced with something honest.